Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is R.S. Raghu, and with me is Manoj Singh Rana, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment, and more. The headlines. India witnesses a declining trend in active coronavirus cases. National recovery rate improves consistently. Government of India takes several initiatives to enhance availability of oxygen, streamline distribution and strengthen its storage infrastructure in the country. Over 17 crore doses of COVID-19 vaccine administered in India so far. Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, writes to Prime Minister Narendra Modi expressing solidarity with India in fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. Nepal Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli loses a vote of confidence in lower house of parliament. And Alexander Zverev clinches his second Madrid Open title, beating Matteo Berrettini. As the number of COVID cases is on the rise, we appeal to our listeners to take all the precautions and all those above 18 years of age to get vaccinated without any hesitation. The vaccination for persons between the age of 18 and 44 years has begun at designated facilities. Stay safe and protected by following these 3 simple steps. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki duri for social distancing, focus on hand and face hygiene. And now the news in detail. India is witnessing a declining trend in the active number of COVID cases. And as a positive sign, with this, the COVID recovery rate of the country is also consistently improving. However, several states and union territories are still registering high number of cases in the country. The Health and Family Welfare Ministry on Monday said that the active cases comprise 16.52% of the total cumulative positive cases. There are over 37,45,000 active cases in the country at present. As the country is registering more than 3 lakh recoveries daily from the past many days, the recovery rate has further improved to 82.38%. The Health Ministry has said over 3,53,000 patients have recovered from this infectious disease within 24 hours. So far, over 1 crore 86 lakh patients have already recovered from the infection. The country has registered over 3,66,000 new COVID cases in the last 24 hours. The Health Ministry has said a total of 3,754 deaths have been reported in the country within 24 hours, taking the toll to over 2,46,000 across the country. Indian Council of Medical Research has informed that over 14,74,000 tests of coronavirus samples were conducted within 24 hours.
In order to address the surge in demand for oxygen, the centre has undertaken key measures to increase the availability, streamline the distribution and strengthen the oxygen storage infrastructure in the country. The Commerce and Industry Minister said the steps undertaken focus on the entire oxygen supply chain, including efforts for improving oxygen production, enhancing tanker availability to optimize logistics, improving oxygen storage at the last mile, and easing norms of procurement. Oxygen availability has been enhanced by an increase in production capacity and production, setting up of pressure swing adsorption PSA plants, import of liquid medical oxygen from overseas, and procurement of oxygen concentrators. For enhancing tanker availability to streamline transportation, nitrogen and argon tankers have been converted, tankers and containers have been imported, domestic manufacturing of tankers increased, and rail and air transportation of tankers is being undertaken to reduce the turnaround time. The oxygen digital tracking system has been set up for real-time monitoring, and driver availability is being enhanced with the training of MHV drivers. For improving oxygen storage, the number of and capacity of cryogenic tankers at hospitals is being enhanced, and medical oxygen cylinders are being procured. Relaxation of general financial rules has been undertaken to enable faster procurement of critical supplies. India is the fastest country globally to administer 17 crore COVID vaccine doses. It has taken 114 days to achieve this coverage, while China took 119 days and the USA 115 days for reaching the same landmark. Over 17 crore 1 lakh vaccine doses have been administered so far in the country. In the last 24 hours, more than 6.8 lakh vaccination doses were administered in the country.
In another step in support of India's efforts to fight the second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, Germany has sent an oxygen plant with the capacity of generating 4 lakh litres of oxygen. The plant will serve the Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel COVID Hospital in Delhi, which is being operated by the DRDO. German ambassador to India, Walter Lindner, inspected the plant on Monday. Speaking to All India Radio, Ambassador Lindner said that he visited the massive oxygen generation plant and oversaw the test run of the plant earlier in the day.
It's quite a huge oxygen producing plant, so we needed 2 big air transporters, A400M buses from the German military, which brought in the first part last Thursday and then last Friday the second part. And today I visited it already, and so they did the test runs, and so by tomorrow they will be instructing and teaching the Indian side to maneuver it, because it will be then in the hands of the Indian army. And then I'm hopeful that on Wednesday it will be operational, and then we can already start working and saving lives.
Meanwhile, a shipment of 10 oxygen concentrators and 141 ventilators from Spain reached India on Monday. MEA spokesperson Arinda Bagchi said India values the support from our European Union partner Spain. Now let us take a look at the coronavirus updates from around the world. Prime Minister of Bangladesh Sheikh Hasina has expressed solidarity with India in fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. In a letter addressed to Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Ms. Hasina conveyed her condolences and prayers for the victims of the COVID-19 pandemic in India, said the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Bangladesh. Meanwhile, Bangladesh will receive 5 lakh doses of Sinopharm COVID-19 vaccines from China on May the 12th. Bangladesh has stepped up efforts to procure COVID-19 vaccines from alternative sources after the supply from the Serum Institute of India SII stopped due to increased demand caused by a sudden surge in COVID-19 cases in India. Bangladesh has already approved emergency use of the Sputnik V vaccine from Russia and the Sinopharm vaccine from China. Foreign Minister Dr. A.K. Abdul Menon has urged the US also to supply 2 to 4 million doses of the vaccine to Bangladesh urgently. America's top public health expert Dr. Anthony Fauci said on Sunday that getting people vaccinated is the only long-term solution to the current COVID-19 crisis in India, as he called for scaling up manufacturing of coronavirus vaccines both domestically and globally to fight the pandemic. This is All India Radio giving you the world news.
3 steps to stay protected and stay safe from COVID-19. Wear face mask, 2 gaz ki duri to maintain social distancing, maintain hand and face hygiene.
Welcome back to the world news. Nepal Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli has lost the vote of confidence in the House of Representatives. He secured only 93 votes in the lower house of parliament during a special session convened on the directives of President Bidya Devi Bhandari. The required number of votes is 136 to save the government. KP Oli required at least 136 votes in the 275-member House of Representatives to win the confidence motion, as 4 members are currently under suspension. President Bidya Devi Bhandari on Monday prorogued the country's parliament after the government lost a vote of confidence. The vote of confidence placed by Oli before the 271-member House of Representatives secured 93 votes in favour and 124 against. At least 28 dissidents from the ruling Nepal Communist Party, Unified Marxist-Leninist, NCP-UML, including former Prime Ministers Jhalanath Khanal and Madhav Kumar Nepal, abstained from voting. Last week, the Communist Party of Nepal Maoist Centre, a key faction led by Pushpakamal Dahal Prachand, withdrew support to the government, leaving it without a majority in the House. The party said the Oli government had breached the constitution and that its recent activities posed a threat to the democratic process and national sovereignty. Moving the motion for vote of confidence, KP Oli said it was unfortunate that a government that has tirelessly worked for the country's development and nation building is being targeted for narrow and partisan interests. In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on vaccine technologies, India and South Africa's joint proposal for a TRIPS waiver on COVID technology that recently received US President Biden's support, and a way forward in ensuring equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines around the world. In an exclusive interview to All India Radio, Mr. Achal Prabhala, writer and researcher on intellectual property rights, Shuttleworth Fellow, and an advocate for IP reform and access to medicines in the developing world with special emphasis on India, Brazil and South Africa, speaks on these topics.
So Achal, my first question to you is, where does the world stand in terms of vaccine availability and the population which has been completely inoculated?
The way the world stands right now is that about 20% of the world is the population that lives in rich countries. So this is the US, the UK, the EU, Japan, Australia, a few other countries like the United Arab Emirates. And these countries are doing very well. In the United Kingdom and the United States especially, over 30% to 50% of the population has received enough to be fully vaccinated, which means that the population that's received vaccines in these countries is to such an extent that these societies can return to normalcy, which is what they are currently doing. The US economy is surging, the United Kingdom is opening, and this stands in stark contrast to what's happening in India, for instance. We have about 2% of our population who have been fully vaccinated to date. Countries in sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, have done even worse. They have vaccinated only about 1% of their populations. The rest of the world, about 30% of the world, lives in what are called middle-income countries. These are Latin American countries, North African countries, and there the experience has been spotty. I think that in most cases they are doing almost as badly as poor countries. They have been locked out largely of the Western vaccines, but what they have done is go to Russia and China, strike deals with these countries for their vaccines, sometimes setting up plants to manufacture the vaccines, and they've been able to try to get back on the path of normalcy through the use of non-Western COVID vaccines.
So Achal, could you elaborate for our listeners what are the different technologies that underpin these vaccines currently?
The technology differences are actually fairly easy to understand. There is old vaccine technology, which constitutes the majority of vaccines out in the market, including the Western vaccines and the Russian and Chinese vaccines. The oldest technology that we have is what's called an inactivated virus or killed virus vaccines. And those would be vaccines such as the Sinovac and Sinopharm vaccines from China. Those would be the Covaxin vaccine that was developed in India by Bharat Biotech. Then you have other old technologies like adenoviral vector vaccines. So these are vaccines where an adenovirus is the method of stimulating immune protection. And these vaccines include the AstraZeneca vaccine, which we take in India as Covishield. These include the Sputnik V vaccine, which actually has 2 adenoviral vectors. And this includes also the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which has been developed and is being used currently in the United States and the United Kingdom, but hasn't yet made its way to India, but really should, because the unique aspect of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is that it's a one-dose vaccine. And what that means is that poor countries who really do have strained resources to vaccinate people twice is very difficult. And in a way, if you had a vaccine which you only needed to use once, that's a huge improvement in the system and could really change the rate of vaccinations in this country. In addition to that, you also have things like protein subunit vaccines, which is the Novavax vaccine. It's yet to come on the market. It is going to seek approval in the United States, and we might be producing that vaccine here towards the end of this year. That's also a very easy vaccine to make, which makes it particularly useful because you can produce it quite quickly. In addition to these, you have what are called new technologies. And the only real new technology that's come out during the pandemic is the mRNA technology, which stands for messenger ribonucleic acid technology, which is the platform that the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines are based on. The mRNA vaccines, the unique thing about them is that they can be produced as a chemical process, not a biological process. And I'll explain what this means and what the benefits are. all other older vaccine technologies, they require a virus or a protein to be cultivated and grown. And that takes trouble and that also takes time. It means also that the expertise required to make older vaccines is more specialized. So not every pharmaceutical company in India, for instance, can make an older vaccine technology. You have to have worked on the broader class of drugs that vaccines fall under, which are called biologics, in order to be able to make a vaccine. mRNA technology, because it's a chemical process, is actually simpler. And in fact, any pharmaceutical company that makes any injectable drug, right? So as long as you produce an injectable pharmaceutical, you could potentially make the mRNA vaccine. And then secondly, it's also much faster to produce because it doesn't involve a time-consuming biological process. We don't have these vaccines here, but we should because they would be ideal to use in the developing world. Among the two that's out, the Pfizer vaccine requires extreme storage requirements in extreme freeze, which means that it's less useful in developing countries than the Moderna vaccine, which does not require the same extent of freezing. And so the Moderna vaccine's mRNA technology is really the ideal technology for us to be making more of here and everywhere else in the world. And the problem, of course, is that we are not, because the technology is being held close to in the company and not being shared with anyone else.
Now, given the different types of vaccines that you have just elaborated, I, as an individual, should I be picking one vaccine over the other, or is it more advisable to go for any available vaccine?
Pawan, this is a good question. I'm glad that you asked it. Firstly, there's a perception that Western vaccines in general are better than non-Western vaccines, right? Whether that is Sinovac from China or Sputnik V from Russia or Covaxin from India. It's nonsense. It is genuinely nonsense. There's excellent data surrounding the non-Western vaccines, the best of them, and they should be treated equally. In fact, the kind of technology that Covaxin employs, which is the inactivated virus, in general suggests that it would work better against some of the new variants than the other older technologies such as the adenoviral vector vaccine. Now, there are minor differences between these vaccines, but those differences as well are based on what we know about them. So the AstraZeneca vaccine was tested quite early, so it wasn't actually tested as much against the variants. The only variant it was tested against was the South African variant, and there too we have very limited information. We know that it doesn't work as well against transmission of the virus, which means that with the AstraZeneca vaccine, you might still catch the South African variant, but we do know that it works fairly well against severe manifestations of the disease once you catch it, or hospitalization, which is what you're really concerned with, right? So with some of the other newer vaccines like J&J and Novavax, because they did their trials later than the other vaccines, they've actually been able to test them against the variant. So, the information that we have about vaccines is also really situational. Efficacy rates, similarly, are mostly meaningless because unless you know what the clinical protocols and trial designs were that created that efficacy rate, it's meaningless. So the Sinovac vaccine, for instance, which works very well and is likely to be approved by the WHO this year, produced an efficacy result of 50% from its trials in Brazil. And this was widely derided, and people said, why should I take a vaccine that has 50% efficacy when Pfizer and Moderna and even Sputnik are claiming over 90% efficacy in their results? So the problem with that is accepting that figure as being something that you can compare, because the Brazilian trial was conducted with COVID healthcare workers working in a COVID healthcare ward, taking care of patients recovering from COVID. Now, their risk was infinitesimally greater than what anyone else's was in the more generalized trials that the other vaccines were tested in. Then there were other differences in the protocols. They measured very mild cases and they put those in, resulting in greater reported infections. They decreased the ideal dosing schedule so as to provide their highly infectable trial participants with greater protection as quickly as they could, right? So if you were to look at all of that data, it produces actually a very different picture of what that efficacy number means. Secondly, that same Sinovac vaccine, actually, if you looked at it along the same parameters as the Western vaccine approvals, you find that it provides 78% efficacy against mild to severe manifestations of the disease, which is the number you really want and that you're interested in, right? It provides 100% efficacy against moderate to severe manifestations of the disease. Again, that's the number that you really want to see. So there's so much information that's lurking behind these very simple numbers that people toss around. It could prevent you from taking an excellent, useful solution that could save your life.
So in essence, what you are recommending is that for everyone to just get vaccinated, whichever vaccine is available to them.
Absolutely. So regardless of the minor differences, what we know is that once you're vaccinated, you are better protected against anything. The existing strains, the new strains, some variant that hasn't even come up yet, you are better protected. And your society is better protected as a whole because these mutants can't even develop if you're vaccinated to a good extent. And you are protected as a country because there is less circulation, transmission, and infection in general. It works. You should get vaccinated. Everybody should.
Now, the United States under the Biden administration has backed the TRIPS waiver proposal, which was forwarded by India and South Africa at the WTO. Now, what is the crux of the joint proposal from India and South Africa at TRIPS?
So the TRIPS waiver proposal was to say, in a global emergency like the one we're in now, the right of few pharmaceutical companies to gain extraordinary profit at the cost of human life is simply unexplainable and unjustifiable. And the proposal was floated by South Africa and India. It was led by South Africa actually at the WTO in October last year. And last week, a welcome turning point came in that debate when the US government, the Biden administration, signaled through trade representative Catherine Tai that they would be willing to support this waiver and effectively reverse unwavering support of these pharmaceutical monopolies over the last 25 years that they have existed.
Does the proposal extend to diagnostics and therapeutics, or is it just limited to vaccines?
The TRIPS waiver, in the way that it's proposed, is to all technologies that relate to the pandemic, whatever they are, whether they are therapeutics or treatments or vaccines or diagnostics or test kits.
There is an argument against the TRIPS waiver from countries such as Germany that the waiver will not solve the problem of vaccine shortage, since the problem is the lack of manufacturing capability in the developing world. Does this argument hold any water, according to you?
The short answer is that it doesn't hold water at all, Pawan. And I'll explain exactly what I mean. You're absolutely right. There are several countries that are still holding out. What we hope is that the US signal that they are in favor of this will lead to other countries joining the line. Now, what we need to have is the vaccine recipe shared with pharmaceutical manufacturers. And the vaccine recipe consists of two ingredients. One ingredient is the legal right to make the vaccine, and that is the web of patents and intellectual property that we are trying to suspend, right? The other ingredient, however, is the actual technology, a guide to manufacturing the vaccine, which we also need to have shared. Now, some countries, including Germany, but also other people such as Bill Gates of the Gates Foundation and many influential people even in the Biden administration sincerely believe that even if they were to lift the intellectual property restrictions and share the technology, which is to say, if they were to give us the recipe to make these vaccines, there is no one in India who can make them. Now, that is absolutely untrue. We have 24 registered vaccine manufacturers in the country. Of them, we have only 3 currently making COVID vaccines. We could have 21 more do so, right? We have a large number of companies who make a class of drug called biologics, which are very close scientifically to what vaccines are. They can easily pivot and make vaccines. And in fact, many of them are already doing so, such as a company called Birko Biotech in Hyderabad, which is a biologics manufacturer, has never made vaccines, but because the Sputnik V vaccine technology from Russia was available to them, they are now making vaccines. So it's actually entirely possible. We have over 200 companies in this country who are pharmaceutical manufacturers who make injectable drugs. All of them are capable of making the mRNA vaccine, for instance, right? Because it's a chemical process, as we discussed. So this is, in fact, outdated, archaic, and truly dangerous way of thinking in a pandemic that there is no one here outside the West who can make Western vaccines, because, in fact, there are far more companies in countries like India, but also Brazil and South Africa and Ghana and Indonesia and Turkey who can make these vaccines and are really only waiting for useful technology to use and to produce vaccines out of. We have public sector vaccine manufacturers, drug manufacturers, and a range of other ways in which we can produce pharmaceuticals, firstly, that do not involve private profit. But we also have innovation alternatives to the patent system. The patent system creates a monopoly. The monopoly actually creates inefficiencies, the thing that economists hate. Now, the alternatives look like this. We could have what are called called prize funds. So the government sets out a priority. They say that, look, for us, it's a priority to find a cure for malaria or tuberculosis or whatever it is, right? And the first company that comes to market with a useful invention pharmaceutical that can solve this problem just gets a massive chunk of money. In exchange for that, they give that technology up so that anyone can make the drug, right? So that's called a prize fund. You could have a range of other ways. You could actually fund this research right from the start, like is what happened here in the pandemic. So there are a range of ways in which we could do this using public funds more cleverly and more efficiently to create the pharmaceuticals also that we need, not that, let's say, the pharmaceutical industry always wants to make. We've got lots of policy solutions here, but the US and the UK, the biggest funders of these pharmaceutical companies, they're the ones who really have the power to implement those solutions and change the business model of this industry.
Thank you, Achal. That was indeed an illuminating discussion. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me, Pawan. I appreciate this very much.
At the domestic stock market, key indices rose for the fourth straight session and the rupee appreciated for the third straight day against the US dollar on Monday. The Sensex at the Bombay Stock Exchange gained 296 points or 0.6% to close at 49,502. The Nifty at the National Stock Exchange rose 119 points or 0.8% to 14,942. Global crude oil prices rose after a major cyber attack forced the shutdown of fuel supply pipelines in the US. Moving on to sports, in tennis, world number 6 Alexander Zverev beat Matteo Berrettini to clinch his second Madrid Open title. Zverev rallied to defeat Italian world number 10 Berrettini 6-7, 6-4, 6-3 in the final. In the men's doubles final, Marcel Granollers of Spain and Horacio Zeballos of Argentina defeated Nicolo Mektic and Mate Pavic of Croatia 1-6, 6-3, 10-8, claiming the doubles title yesterday. Earlier, Aryna Sabalenka turned the tables on world number 1 Ashley Barty to win the women's title. The world number 7 Belarus's Sabalenka beat Australian player 6-0, 3-6, 6-4. Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga said that he has never put the Olympics first as the island country extended a state of emergency in Tokyo until the end of May and is struggling to contain a surge in COVID-19 cases.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. The Washington Post writes that the Novavax coronavirus shot, which relies on a more traditional technology, could be a key tool in the global effort to fight the pandemic. The New York Times reports that the Biden administration has said that the healthcare providers cannot discriminate against transgender people. The Gulf Times writes that the United Arab Emirates will bar entry to non-UAE resident travelers from Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal and Sri Lanka starting on Wednesday to try to contain the spread of the coronavirus, it said on Monday. And The Guardian reports that the Uruguay striker Edinson Cavani signs 1-year contract extension at the Manchester United.
A quick look at the headlines once again. India witnesses a declining trend in active coronavirus cases. National recovery rate improves consistently. Government of India takes several initiatives to enhance availability of oxygen, streamline distribution and strengthen its storage infrastructure in the country. Over 17 crore doses of COVID-19 vaccine administered in India so far. Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, writes to Prime Minister Narendra Modi expressing solidarity with India in fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. Nepal Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli loses a vote of confidence in lower house of parliament, and Alexander Zverev clinches his second Madrid Open title, beating Matteo Berrettini. India is celebrating the 151st birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Before we end, let us listen to his favorite bhajan Vaishnav Jan by artists from Kuwait.
वैष्णव जन तो दीने कहिए जे पीद पराई जानी रे पर दुखे उपकार करे तो ये मन अभिमान नानी रे.
And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.